waitress's heart. A waitress is moved when she sees a disabled child going hungry and decides to feed him during her shift. What she doesn't imagine is that this simple gesture would change everything in her life. Minutes later, she discovers that the boy is the son of one of the richest and most powerful men in the city. Now involved in secrets, suspicions, and an unexpected proposal, she will need to face prejudice and fight for a new beginning. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The cafe was packed that Thursday morning. Emily balanced 3 trays on her arms as she navigated between the tables of Sunrise Cafe, an elegant establishment located in the heart of Boston's most upscale neighborhood. At 22, she carried more responsibilities than many twice her age. Table 7, cappuccino with extra cream and almond croissant, announced Mrs. Thompson, the cafe's owner. Emily sighed, adjusting her wrinkled apron. She had gotten this job only 2 weeks ago, after dropping out of her psychology program at the public university. It hadn't been a choice but a necessity. Since her parents suffered a serious car accident 6 months ago, leaving them with permanent disabilities, she had to take care of her brother, Jason, a 19-year-old with severe autism. The insurance settlement money had quickly run out with medical expenses. Reality knocked on the door without warning. Someone needed to work, and that someone was her. "Emily, table 4 is also waiting," shouted Mrs. Thompson. While serving table 7, Emily observed through the cafe's panoramic window the arrival of an imposing black car. From the vehicle emerged a man of approximately 40 years, wearing an impeccably tailored suit. He was holding the hand of a boy of about 8 years old, who seemed extremely uncomfortable. The child was rocking his body back and forth repeatedly. "Richard Crawford," whispered one of the waitresses near Emily. "One of the richest businessmen in the city. He rarely appears in public since his wife passed away 2 years ago." Emily wasn't interested in gossip about wealthy customers, but something about the boy captured her attention. The child entered the cafe looking fixedly at the floor, his hands partially covering his ears. His father guided him to a corner table away from the noise. "Table 4, Emily, the customers are waiting." Mrs. Thompson brought her back to reality. For the next hour, Emily continued her work, but her eyes always found their way to the corner table. The boy continued rocking, while a man who appeared to be a professional, perhaps a therapist or doctor, tried to make him eat without success. The father observed the scene with an expression of fatigue and concern. The boy began to get increasingly agitated. People around started to look, some with curiosity, others with discomfort. Emily recognized those signs, a sensory overload approaching. She knew that pattern well because of Jason. When the boy began to rhythmically hit his hands on the table, knocking over the cutlery, Emily couldn't contain herself any longer. Ignoring Mrs. Thompson's call, she walked to the table. "Excuse me," she said softly, lowering herself to the boy's height. "Can I help?" The father looked at her with surprise and a certain distrust. The professional accompanying them frowned. "We're fine, thank you," the man responded dryly. But Emily kept her gaze on the boy. Without touching him, she began to imitate his rocking movement, synchronizing with his rhythm. Then she took a spoon and began to tap it softly on the table, reproducing the same pattern that the boy was making. The boy stopped for a moment, looking at her hands. For the first time, he seemed to notice someone else's presence in the environment. "He likes patterns," Emily explained quietly. "My brother does too. Sometimes when everything gets too intense, creating a rhythm helps organize the world." Slowly, she took a piece of the untouched sandwich from the plate and placed it next to the spoon that was tapping on the table. She continued the rhythmic movement with her other hand. To everyone's surprise, the boy picked up the piece of sandwich and brought it to his mouth. "My name is Nathan," said the boy suddenly, his voice surprisingly clear. The father stood up abruptly, shocked. He almost never speaks to strangers." Emily smiled at Nathan. "Nice to meet you, Nathan. I'm Emily." For the next few minutes, Emily remained there, softly tapping the spoon while Nathan ate small pieces of the sandwich. No one said a word, as if the enchantment could break at any moment. "Emily, what do you think you're doing?" Mrs. Thompson's shrill voice cut through the moment. "Return to your work." "Immediately!" Emily stood up embarrassed. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson." She returned to her tables, feeling the man's gaze following her. When the cafe finally closed late in the afternoon, Emily was exhausted. She needed to rush out of the pharmacy to buy Jason's medications before catching the bus home. As she was leaving through the back door, she came face to face with the man who had been with Nathan. "Miss," he called, "I'd like to speak with you for a moment." Emily hesitated. "I'm sorry, but I'm in a hurry. My brother is waiting for me." "I'll be brief," he promised. "My name is Richard Crawford. What you did today with my son was extraordinary. Various specialists have been trying to establish a connection with Nathan for months, without success." Emily lowered her eyes. "I didn't do anything special. I just know a bit about this because of my brother." "Do you have training in behavioral therapy, psychology?" She bit her lip. "I was in my second year of psychology, but I had to leave the program to take care of my brother." Richard observed her for a moment, as if he were making an important decision. "I have a proposal for you," he said finally. "I need someone who can help Nathan, someone he accepts. Traditional therapists aren't working." Emily's eyes widened. "But I don't have complete training. I'm not qualified to—" "You accomplished more in 5 minutes than renowned specialists did in weeks," he interrupted. "I'd like to hire you as a therapeutic companion for Nathan. The salary would be substantially higher than what you earn here." Emily's heart raced. That money could solve so many problems. Jason's treatment, the overdue bills, maybe even allow her to return to college eventually. "I don't know," she hesitated. Entering that family's life meant diving into a world completely different from her own. "Think about it carefully." Richard handed her an elegant card. "My private number is there. Call me when you decide." That night, Emily returned to the small apartment in the outskirts where she lived with Jason and her parents. The place was cramped, but clean and organized. Jason was sitting in the living room, meticulously assembling a 1,000-piece puzzle. "Hi, Jay," she smiled, kissing the top of her brother's head. He didn't respond verbally, but lightly touched her hand, his way of saying hello. After preparing dinner and giving her parents their medicine, Emily finally sat on the small balcony of the apartment, looking at the card in her hands. The number seemed to shine under the dim light of the lamp. The difference between the two worlds was stark. The luxury of the upscale neighborhood where the cafe was located, Richard's imported car, in contrast with her cramped apartment and the bills piling up on the table. But it wasn't just money. It was the chance to do something that really mattered, to use the knowledge she had, incomplete, yes, but born from daily experience, to help that boy. "What do you think, Jay?" she asked her brother, who had silently approached and was now looking at the city through the balcony railing. "Should I accept?" Jason didn't answer, but he took her hand and placed it on his, a rare gesture that Emily knew well. It was his way of saying that he trusted her, that he knew she would make the right decision. Taking a deep breath, Emily picked up her phone and dialed the number on the card. The Crawford mansion rose imposingly on the hill of the city's most exclusive neighborhood. When the taxi stopped in front of the ornate iron gates, Emily felt her stomach turn. She had spent the previous night choosing the most appropriate outfit from her few options, deciding on dark jeans and a simple but well-ironed blouse. The key to a security guard checked her name on the list and indicated the way to the main entrance. The garden was extensive and meticulously maintained, with marble sculptures arranged among beds of exotic flowers. "I'm just a waitress trying to help a boy," she repeated to herself as she walked along the polished stone path. "I'm not here to impress anyone." The door was opened before she even rang the bell. A middle-aged woman wearing a discreet uniform received her with a neutral expression. "Miss Emily, Mr. Crawford is waiting for you in his office. Please follow me." The interior of the house was even more impressive than the facade. High ceilings, furniture that looked like works of art, paintings that certainly were worth more than everything Emily owned. But there was something strange about all that luxury. an absence of warmth, of life. It was like walking inside a museum, not a home. The housekeeper led her down a long corridor until stopping in front of a dark wooden door. She knocked softly and announced, "Miss Emily is here, sir." Richard Crawford was sitting behind an imposing desk. He stood up when she entered, gesturing for her to sit in the chair in front of him. "Thank you for coming, Emily," he said, his voice warmer than at the cafe, although still maintaining a certain formality. "I confess I was surprised by your call. I thought perhaps you would refuse the proposal." "I almost did," admitted Emily, deciding to be honest from the start. "But I believe I can help Nathan, and being sincere, the salary you offered would solve many of my current problems." Richard nodded, appreciating her frankness. "Before meeting Nathan, I'd like to explain some details about our family situation." He walked to the window, looking out at the garden. "Nathan was diagnosed with autism at age 3. My wife, Sarah, dedicated herself completely to him, researching, seeking therapies, specialists. When she became ill 2 years ago, Nathan began to regress. After her departure, he closed himself off even more." Emily noticed how he avoided using direct words related to the loss of his wife. "I hired the best specialists in the country, but no one can establish a real connection with him. Nathan refuses to eat in their presence, rarely speaks, and has increasingly frequent meltdowns." "And how was his reaction after our meeting at the cafe?" asked Emily. "He asked about you," Richard answered, turning to face her. "3 times. For someone who has spent months practically in silence, that's extraordinary." At that moment, the office door opened without warning. An elegant woman of approximately 60, perfectly arranged grey hair, entered with firm steps. "So this is the miracle waitress," she said, her tone revealing more skepticism than curiosity. "Mother, this is Emily. Emily, this is Margaret Crawford, my mother." Margaret examined her from head to toe without disguising it. "Richard told me about your natural talent with Nathan. Although I find it precipitous to replace qualified professionals with a student who abandoned college." Emily felt her face burn. How did she know about that? "Mother, please," Richard intervened. "We talked about this." Margaret smiled without warmth. "I just expressed my opinion. After all, we're talking about my grandson's well-being." Turning to Emily, she added, "I hope you understand the magnitude of the responsibility, dear. This isn't just any family." With that, she left the office as abruptly as she had entered. The silence weighed for a few seconds before Richard spoke again. "I apologize for my mother. Since losing Sarah, she has assumed certain responsibilities in the house. She's just being protective." "I understand," replied Emily, though she didn't completely understand. There was something more in that family dynamic that wasn't being said. "Would you like to meet Nathan now?" Richard asked. She nodded, following him out of the office. As they walked through the house, Emily noticed the scarcity of photographs or personal objects. It was as if the house had been decorated to impress visitors, not to welcome a family. "Nathan has his own space upstairs," explained Richard, as they climbed an imposing staircase. "It's where he spends most of his time." At the top of the stairs, they followed another corridor to a door decorated with planets and stars. Richard knocked softly. "Nathan, there's someone here who'd like to see you." There was no response. Richard opened the door slowly. Nathan's room was surprisingly different from the rest of the house. It was spacious and well lit, with walls painted light blue. A telescope was positioned near the window. Shelves full of books on astronomy and science occupied an entire wall. Nathan was sitting on the floor surrounded by Lego pieces. He didn't look up when they entered. "Nathan," Richard called again, "look who's come to visit you." The boy continued, absorbed in his construction. Emily approached slowly and sat on the floor, at a respectful distance. She observed what he was building, a complex structure that looked like a space station. "Is that the International Space Station?" she asked softly. Nathan paused for a moment, but didn't respond or look at her. Emily noticed some loose pieces near her. She picked them up and began to assemble a small spacecraft without trying to interact directly with him. After a few minutes, she positioned her creation near Nathan's construction. Could this spacecraft dock here? She asked, indicating a part of the station. Finally, Nathan looked at her. His eyes widened in recognition. "You're the lady from the cafe," he said, his voice low but clear. "The one who made the rhythm." Emily smiled. "Yes, that's me. My name is Emily." "Emily," he repeated. Then, to her surprise, he took the small spacecraft she had built and carefully attached it to the station. "This is the docking module." Richard, who was observing from the door, seemed unable to believe what he was seeing. For the next hour, Emily simply stayed there, building small parts that Nathan integrated into his larger project. She didn't force conversation, respected his silences, and followed his rhythm. When they finally said goodbye, Nathan surprised her again. "Will you come back tomorrow?" "If you want me to come back," Emily replied. Nathan nodded once, returning his attention to the Legos. Outside the room, Richard was visibly emotional. "Never. Since Sarah left us, I've never seen him interact like this with anyone." In the hallway, as they returned to the ground floor, they encountered Margaret again. She had obviously observed the interaction from a distance. "An impressive performance for a first day," she commented. "I hope it's not just the enthusiasm of novelty." "I believe we've established a good foundation to start," replied Emily, refusing to be intimidated. "Nathan is an extraordinary boy." Margaret raised her eyebrows. "We'll see how long this enchantment lasts. History doesn't give us reason for optimism." In the office, Richard discussed the practical details of the job, schedules, responsibilities, and of course the salary, which was indeed substantial. Emily would officially start the next day. "Is there any specific routine I should follow?" she asked. The previous therapists tried to implement various routines, but Nathan resisted. "Them all," Richard answered. "For now, I'd like you to simply continue doing what you did today. Connect with him." As she left the mansion, Emily felt the weight of the responsibility she had just taken on. It wasn't just a well-paying job, it was the chance to make a real difference in the life of a child who was trapped in his own world. That night, returning home, she found Jason agitated. He was pacing back and forth in the small apartment, flapping his hands repeatedly. "What's wrong, Jay?" she asked, concerned. Her mother, who was watching her son with a tired expression, explained, "The doctor called today. The tests showed that he'll need surgery to correct a problem with his spine. We're on the public health waiting list, but it could take more than a year." Emily felt her heart tighten. A year was too long. Jason's condition could significantly worsen during that period. How much would it cost to do the surgery at a private hospital? She asked, already knowing it would probably be an impossible amount. "More than $100,000, replied her mother, tears in her eyes. "The doctor said he'll try to expedite the process, but there are no guarantees." That night, while everyone slept, Emily did calculations. Even with the generous salary offered by Richard, it would take months to save enough for Jason's surgery. But it was a start. For the first time in a long time, there was a light at the end of the tunnel. She looked at her brother, who had finally fallen asleep after hours of agitation. She gently touched his hair. "I'll make it, Jay," she promised, in a low voice. "I'll help Nathan, and I'll get the money for your surgery, no matter what that woman thinks of me." 3 months passed since Emily began working at the Crawford mansion. Gradually, she established a routine with Nathan that respected his needs, while introducing small challenges. The progress was slow but consistent, like a delicate dance, 2 steps forward, 1 back, always respecting the boy's rhythm. That Friday morning, Emily arrived early as usual. She already knew every corner of the mansion, although she still felt like a stranger in that environment. She went directly to Nathan's room, where she found him already awake, organizing his collection of rocks and minerals. "Good morning, Nathan," she greeted softly. "Emily," he responded, without diverting his gaze from the stones, "is today library day?" She smiled. Thursdays were library days, a routine they had established together. Nathan loved the astronomy section of the public library, although the visits had been a battle at first. The initial attempts resulted in severe meltdowns, But gradually, with patience and preparation, Nathan learned to handle the environment. "Today is Friday," she replied gently. "Garden Day, remember?" Nathan nodded, continuing his methodical organization. Emily knew not to interrupt him. She had learned to respect these moments, understanding that they weren't simple habits, but important ways for Nathan to process the world. When he finished, they went downstairs together for breakfast. In the spacious kitchen, the housekeeper Rosa had already prepared everything according to Nathan's preferences, pancakes cut into perfect squares without one touching another on the plate. "Good morning, Emily." Richard entered the kitchen, surprising her. Normally, he would have already left for the office at that hour. "Good morning, Mr. Crawford," she responded, formally still maintaining the professional distance she considered appropriate. "Is Dad going to the garden too?" Nathan asked, briefly looking at his father. Richard seemed surprised by his son's direct question. These moments still caught him off guard, small openings in the fortress that Nathan had built around himself. Well, I can go if you want," he replied, looking uncertainly at Emily. "That would be great," she encouraged. "We're planning to identify the bird species that visit the garden." Over the last few months, Emily had subtly tried to create opportunities for father and son to reconnect. Richard, always overloaded with work and perhaps still struggling with his own grief, rarely participated in Nathan's daily activities. In the garden, equipped with a bird guide and binoculars, the three sat on a bench under a leafy tree. Nathan held the guide carefully, flipping through the pages with genuine interest. "That's a robin," pointed Richard when a bird landed on a nearby branch. "Your mother loved their song. She used to say they were the first to wake up in the garden." Nathan looked at his father, their eyes momentarily connected. Mom liked birds. The question, so simple and direct, seemed to hit Richard like a wave. Emily noticed that he rarely spoke of his wife with Nathan. "Yes," he finally answered, his voice slightly choked. "She loved them. Actually, she was the one who planned this entire garden to attract different species." For more than an hour they remained there, Richard sharing memories of the mother that Nathan barely knew, associating them with the birds that appeared. Emily observed, intervening only when necessary, feeling simultaneously part of that moment and a strange intruder. When Nathan moved away to follow a hummingbird, Richard turned to Emily. "I don't know how to thank you for what you've been doing," he said quietly. "He's coming back to us, somehow." Emily felt her face heat up under his intense gaze. In the last few months, she had noticed subtle changes in Richard. The less rigid posture, the more frequent smile, small gestures that revealed the man behind the professional facade. "I'm just following what he teaches me," she responded honestly. "Nathan is the one doing the hard work." The moment was interrupted by the appearance of Margaret, who was walking through the garden with elegant posture, wearing a pastel silk outfit that contrasted with her severe expression. "What an enchanting scene," she commented, approaching. "Almost looks like a family, doesn't it?" The comment, loaded with insinuations, hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Richard stood up, clearly uncomfortable. "Mother, I thought you were at the hospital committee appointment." "They cancelled at the last minute," replied Margaret, her gaze fixed on Emily. "Fortunately, so I can spend more time with my grandson and observe the innovative methods of his companion." Despite months of coexistence, the relationship between Emily and Margaret remained tense. The matriarch never failed to subtly remind her of her place in that house, an employee, nothing more. "Nathan is making remarkable progress," Emily responded politely. "Today we're learning about the birds in the garden." "Yes, I can see. Very educational," Margaret smiled without warmth. "Richard, we need to talk about next week's charity event. I think it would be a good opportunity for Nathan to start participating in the family's social obligations." Emily felt an internal alarm sound. Nathan wasn't ready yet for a large social event. It could be devastating for his progress. "It might be too early," she suggested carefully. "Nathan still has difficulties with noisy and unpredictable environments." Margaret completely ignored her, addressing only her son. "It's important that he begins to understand his responsibilities as heir to the Crawford family. He can't stay isolated forever. Before Richard could respond, Nathan came running back, holding something in his hands. "Emily, look!" A hummingbird feather. She bent down to see the small treasure, genuinely enchanted. "It's beautiful, Nathan. We can research more about hummingbirds when we go back inside. Or perhaps your father could take you to visit the aviary at the botanical garden," suggested Margaret, her voice softening when speaking to her grandson. "Next weekend after the charity event." Richard seemed divided, caught between his son's needs and his mother's expectations. It was a dynamic that Emily had observed repeatedly over the last few months. Margaret always found ways to insert Nathan into high society social situations, while Richard hesitated, fearing setbacks. Back at the house, Emily helped Nathan with his lessons, adapting the school material to make it more accessible. He had been removed from traditional school after losing his mother when the meltdowns became more frequent. Now he studied at home with private tutors and with Emily. "I need to leave early today, Nathan," she explained as they finished the science lesson. "My brother has an important medical appointment." Nathan looked at her directly, something he rarely did at the beginning. "Is Jason sick?" Emily smiled, touched by his concern. In the last few months, she had shared stories about Jason with Nathan, creating an invisible connection between the two boys who had never met. "He needs surgery," she explained simply. "We're trying to work that out." In reality, the situation was more complicated. Despite the good salary, Emily was still far from achieving the amount needed for Jason's surgery. His condition had worsened in recent weeks, with more intense pain and partial loss of movement in one leg. While putting away the teaching materials, she didn't notice Margaret standing at the door, observing her. "Fascinating how you've managed to establish such a close relationship with my grandson," commented the matriarch, entering the room. Emily maintained her composure, continuing to organize the books. "Nathan is very intelligent and sensitive. He just needed someone who understood his way of seeing the world." Margaret approached, examining Nathan's schoolwork. "You're very young, aren't you? 22, 23 years old?" 22, confirmed Emily, wondering where that conversation was going. Interesting age, so many possibilities ahead. Margaret walked around the room, touching objects distractedly. "It must be difficult to reconcile your own ambitions with such heavy family responsibilities." Emily felt a chill down her spine. How did Margaret know so much about her personal life? "I do what's necessary for my family," she replied simply. "Naturally, and that's why my son admires you so much." Margaret smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Richard has always valued family loyalty. It's one of his most attractive qualities, don't you agree?" The insinuation was too clear to be ignored. Emily felt her face burn. "My relationship with Mr. Crawford is strictly professional." Of course, Margaret waved her hand as if shooing away an inconvenient fly. "But you must have noticed how he watches you, how the atmosphere of this house has changed since your arrival." She moved closer, lowering her voice. "We're practical women, Emily. We can speak frankly. Richard is a lonely, rich and attractive man. You are young, beautiful and apparently miraculous with his son. It's a dangerous combination." "Mrs. Crawford," Emily responded, keeping her voice firm despite her racing heart. "I'm here to help Nathan, nothing more." Margaret laughed softly. "I'm sure your intentions are the purest, but feelings arise in the most unexpected places, don't they? Especially when there are unmet needs." Before Emily could respond, Margaret continued, "I'd like you to know that I admire your work with Nathan. Really, and precisely because of that, it would be a shame if personal complications interfered with that progress." With that, she left the room, leaving Emily trembling with anger and confusion. In the taxi on the way to the hospital, Emily couldn't get the conversation out of her head. It was true that something was changing between her and Richard. Small moments of connection, looks that lasted a second longer, conversations that went beyond the strictly professional. But to imagine any personal relationship. However, it would be a lie to deny that sometimes she caught herself thinking of him in ways that exceeded the employer-employee relationship. She admired his dedication to Nathan, his intelligence, the kindness that was beginning to emerge beneath the professional facade. But there was an abyss between them, of class, of experiences, of worlds, and Margaret Crawford seemed determined to ensure that this abyss remained impassable. The key. Crawford Foundation charity event was organized in the luxurious ballroom of the most elegant hotel in the city. Emily had tried in every way to dissuade Richard from taking Nathan, explaining how such environments could sensorially overwhelm him, but Margaret was inflexible. "It's a family tradition," insisted the matriarch. "All Crawfords, from a young age, participate in these events. Nathan needs to get used to it." Now, observing the boy from a distance, Emily could see the signs of growing distress. Nathan was sitting rigidly at a table, hands partially covering his ears, gaze fixed on the floor. Richard, surrounded by businessmen and influential figures, cast worried glances at his son. Emily discreetly approached, sitting beside Nathan. She wasn't officially working that night. Margaret had made it clear that her presence would be only as emergency support, not as a guest. But she couldn't stay at home knowing that Nathan would face that situation. "It's very noisy here, isn't it?" she whispered to him. Nathan nodded, his fingers nervously tapping on the table. "How about we count the stars on the ceiling?" she suggested, pointing to the elaborate crystal chandelier that reflected small points of light throughout the hall. It was a technique she frequently used with him, transforming stressful elements of the environment into observation and counting games that helped him self-regulate. For a few minutes she managed to distract him, but then the photographers began to circulate, flashes popping throughout the hall. Nathan hunched over, his breathing dangerously accelerating. "We need to get out of here," Emily realized, standing up and extending her hand to him. "Let's find a quieter place." Before they could move, Margaret appeared beside them, accompanied by an elegant couple. "Nathan, dear, the Watsons want to meet you," she announced, completely ignoring her grandson's signs of discomfort. "Robert is a great supporter of our foundation." "Mrs. Crawford," Emily intervened gently, "I think Nathan needs a break." Margaret gave her an icy look. "I'm sure my grandson can endure a few minutes of social conversation. Can't you, Nathan?" Her voice was sweet but firm. It was the last straw. Nathan covered his ears completely and began to rock back and forth, a low moan escaping his throat. Nearby guests began to look, some with curiosity, others with discomfort. Emily didn't hesitate. Ignoring Margaret's furious look, she stood up and guided Nathan out of the hall, finding a small winter garden on the hotel's mezzanine. There, away from the noise and lights, she helped him calm down using breathing techniques they had practiced together. Minutes later, Richard appeared, his face pale with concern. "How is he?" "Better now," replied Emily. "But it was too much for him, Mr. Crawford. Environments like this with so many unpredictable stimuli—" "I know," he interrupted, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "I should have listened to you from the beginning." He sat beside his son, who was now calmer, observing the fish in a small decorative aquarium. "Nathan, I'm sorry for insisting that you come," he said sincerely. "We can go home now." The boy looked at his father, a direct look, something that was still rare. "Will you be angry with Emily? Grandma seemed angry." Richard smiled sadly. "No, son. I would never be angry with someone who takes such good care of you." At that moment, Margaret entered the winter garden, her impeccable posture contrasting with the barely contained fury in her gaze. "Richard, we have 300 guests downstairs waiting for your speech," she said, completely ignoring Emily and Nathan. "This is completely inappropriate." "Mother, Nathan needs to go home," he responded firmly. "I'll make my speech quickly and then take them." Margaret looked at Emily with barely disguised contempt. I imagine it was her idea to leave in the middle of the event, compromising years of the Foundation's work because of a little discomfort. "It wasn't little discomfort, Mother," Richard replied, his voice hardening. "Nathan was about to have a severe meltdown, and if there's someone who understands what he needs, it's Emily." Margaret's face reddened. It's fascinating how this young woman has managed to become indispensable in such a short time, almost as if she had planned it from the beginning. Richard stood up. What are you insinuating, Mother? Margaret stepped forward, abandoning any pretense of cordiality. I'm saying that perhaps we should better investigate the background of this person in whom we've placed so much trust, someone who abandoned college, who has a sick brother, desperately needing money, who magically appeared in our lives at the moment when you were most vulnerable. Emily felt as if she had been slapped. How did Margaret know so many details about her life? Mrs. Crawford, I don't know what you're suggesting, but I'm not talking to you, Margaret cut her off. Turning to her son, she continued, I had her investigated, Richard, as a precaution. You would be surprised at what I discovered. From the folder she was carrying, Margaret removed some sheets of paper, a harassment lawsuit against a former boss which was mysteriously withdrawn, substantial family debts, a brother who urgently needs expensive surgery. Don't you think it's too much of a coincidence that she appears precisely in our lives? Richard looked at the papers, then at Emily, his face a mask of confusion. Is it true, he finally asked, about the lawsuit, the debts? Emily felt her stomach sink. There was no shame in her story, but exposed like this, out of context, it seemed like a calculated plot. The lawsuit was against a college professor who harassed me, she replied, fighting to keep her voice firm. I withdrew the complaint because he was transferred to another institution and I didn't have the strength to continue. The debts are from my parents and brothers. Medical treatments after the accident. She looked directly at Richard. I never hid my financial situation. You knew from the beginning that I accepted the job because I needed the money. But never ever did I use Nathan for this. Margaret smiled triumphantly. How convenient. But then explain why you've been researching the Crawford Foundation and its donations, or why you've shown so much interest in Richard's business trips. What? I never... Mother, enough! Richard raised his voice. This is ridiculous. Is it? Margaret raised her eyebrows. Then why has she been investigating our family? Why does her new therapeutic methodology involve so many questions about our resources, our connections? Nathan, sensing the growing tension, began to rock again. Emily instinctively went to him, but Margaret blocked her path. See how she houses Nathan, how she created this dependency. Richard looked from his mother to Emily, the conflict evident on his face. Nathan began to make distressed sounds. Emily felt something break inside her. The trust she had built over months was being destroyed in minutes by malicious insinuations. I won't allow this to continue, she said, her voice low but firm. Nathan needs calm now, not this spectacle. She addressed Richard. Mr. Crawford, I never had any intention beyond helping your son. If my presence now causes more harm than good, perhaps it's best for me to step away. With that, she picked up her purse and left the winter garden, tears she refused to shed burning her eyes. Behind her, she could hear Nathan calling her name, his voice rising in panic. It was the worst weekend of Emily's life. Jason was worse, with intense pain that medications could no longer control. The doctors had been clear. Without the surgery soon, the damage could become permanent. On Monday, she received a call from the Crawford mansion. It was Rosa, the housekeeper, informing her that her services would no longer be needed. She could come by to pick up her belongings and receive her final payment. When she arrived at the mansion, she was led directly to Richard's office. She expected to find him cold, distant, perhaps even accusatory. Instead, she found a visibly haggard man. Nathan hasn't left his room since the night of the event, he said without preamble. He refuses to eat, to speak to anyone. Emily felt her heart tighten. I'm sorry about that. He constantly asks for you, continued Richard. But my mother, she's convinced that you manipulated the situation somehow. And you? What do you believe? Richard sighed deeply. Honestly, I don't know what to think. The documents my mother showed are true, Emily confirmed. I never lied about my situation, but I never ever used Nathan or your family to obtain advantages. Richard nodded slowly. My mother suggested hiring a professional team of therapists to replace you, people with impeccable credentials. I understand, Emily responded, swallowing the lump in her throat. I hope it works for Nathan. While Richard prepared the final check, she gathered courage to make one last request. Could I say goodbye to Nathan? It would be important for him to have proper closure, not just a disappearance. Richard hesitated but finally agreed. In Nathan's room, she found the boy curled up in bed, his astronomy books scattered untouched. "Nathan," she called softly from the door. "May I come in?" He immediately raised his head, his eyes lighting up. "Emily, you came back." The joy in his voice almost broke her determination. "I came to say goodbye, Nathan. I won't be working here anymore." His face contorted in confusion. "Why, don't you like me anymore?" "Of course I like you," she responded, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I like you very much. But sometimes, even when we like someone very much, we need to separate." "Like when Mom went away?" he asked, his voice small. Emily felt tears in her eyes. "No, not like that. Your mum never wanted to leave you, and I don't want to either. But some adults think someone else can help you better than I can." "But I don't want someone else," Nathan protested, his lip trembling. "I want you." She hugged him gently, respecting his sensory limits. "I'll always remember you, Nathan, and everything we learned together will stay with you." As she left the room, she found Richard in the hallway, obviously having overheard the conversation. "He'll be okay," Emily assured, though she wasn't sure. "He's stronger than everyone thinks." In the weeks that followed, Emily immersed herself in a mechanical routine. She got a month's job at an occupational therapy clinic, where the methods were rigid and timed, with no room for the individualized approach she had developed with Nathan. The salary was much lower, barely covering basic expenses, let alone Jason's surgery. One afternoon, returning home after an exhausting shift, she found a familiar car parked in front of her building. Richard Crawford was leaning against the side of the vehicle, looking out of place in that simple neighborhood. "Mr. Crawford, what are you doing here?" He looked different, thinner, with deep circles under his eyes. "Nathan is worse," he said directly. "He refuses to cooperate with the new therapists. Barely eats, doesn't speak. The doctors are considering stronger medication." Emily felt her heart tighten. "I'm sorry, but I don't know how I can help. Your mother made it clear that I'm not welcome." "My mother is no longer living with us," he revealed. "I discovered that she deliberately distorted information about you. The investigator she hired was a former employee with a grudge against me. The questions about the foundation, my trips, all fabricated." Emily stared at him, stunned. "Why would she do that?" "Control," he answered simply. "For years, since Sarah passed away, my mother controlled everything, the house, the staff, even my relationship with Nathan. You threatened that control." He took a step forward. "I came to ask you to come back, not just for Nathan, but for me too." Before Emily could respond, the building door opened and Jason came out, walking with difficulty, supported by a cane. You're late. He stopped when he saw the stranger. "Jason, this is Richard Crawford," Emily introduced. "Mr. Crawford, my brother Jason." Richard observed the young man with genuine interest, noticing the similarities with Emily, the same expressive eyes, though more distant. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Jason. Your sister speaks a lot about you." Jason didn't respond directly but approached, examining Richard with curiosity. "You're Nathan's dad," he said finally. "The star boy." Emily smiled. She had told Jason about Nathan and his love for astronomy. "Yes, that's me," replied Richard, surprised. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of an ambulance on the street. The paramedics quickly entered the neighboring building. Jason began to rock, covering his ears, the same reaction that Nathan had to loud and unpredictable sounds. Richard observed, recognizing the patterns. "Let's go inside," suggested Emily, guiding her brother in. In the small apartment, Richard seemed genuinely interested in Jason, asking questions that demonstrated knowledge about autism, knowledge clearly acquired in recent months. When Jason finally retired to his room, Richard turned to Emily. "He needs the surgery soon, doesn't he?" Emily nodded, too exhausted to hide the truth. The doctors gave a deadline of 3 months before the damage becomes irreversible. Richard studied her for a moment, then said, "I have a proposal. The Crawford Foundation finances medical treatments. For families without resources, we can cover Jason's surgery completely." Emily's eyes widened. "I can't accept that. It would look exactly like what your mother suggested, that I'm using you to get money." "It's not a personal favor," explained Richard. "It's the Foundation's work. Jason qualifies perfectly for our program." He hesitated, then continued. "There's more. I want to propose a professional partnership. The Foundation could finance a therapeutic center based on the methodology you developed with Nathan. You would have total control, autonomy to implement your ideas." Emily stared at him, suspicious of his motivations. "Why? Why would you do this?" Richard sighed deeply. "Because I saw what you accomplished with my son when all the specialists failed. Because I believe your approach can help other children. And because—" he hesitated. "Because in these months without you, I realized that I miss you. Not just as Nathan's therapist, but as you." The confession hung between them, unexpected and honest. "Mr. Crawford." "Richard," he corrected gently. "Richard," she repeated, feeling the name strange on her lips. "I don't want your help if it comes motivated by guilt or by confused feelings." "It's not guilt," he assured. "It's admiration, respect, and yes, something more that I can't completely name, but the professional proposal is separate from that. You deserve this opportunity on your own merit." Emily considered his words. The idea of developing her own therapeutic method, of helping other children like Nathan and Jason, had always been her dream, interrupted by life's circumstances. "I would need guarantees of autonomy," she finally said. "No external interference in the therapeutic approach. And as for us, we would need time, clear boundaries." Richard smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his tired face. "Whatever you need." 6 months later, the Constellation Therapeutic Center opened its doors. Located on a large wooded property, the space had been designed with Emily's direct contribution, incorporating sensorially adaptable environments and areas that promoted connection with nature. Jason, recovered from the successful surgery, became an integral part of the team. His unique perspective as a young autistic adult brought valuable insights to the work with the children. Nathan attended the center regularly, flourishing in the environment that respected his needs while gently expanding his horizons. The relationship between him and Jason developed naturally, two souls who understood the world in a similar way. Margaret Crawford appeared at the center on a rainy afternoon, 6 months after the inauguration. Emily found her observing Nathan and Jason in the astronomy room, where they were building a model of the solar system together. "He's happy," commented Margaret, without looking at Emily. "I haven't seen him like this since Sarah was alive." Emily didn't respond, waiting. "I came to apologize," continued the matriarch, the words clearly difficult for her. "Not for the suspicions. Any mother would be cautious with a stranger who approaches the family. But for the way I acted, for the lies I created." She turned to face Emily directly. "I lost my daughter many years ago. Then I lost my daughter-in-law. The fear of losing my grandson and my son as well transformed me into someone I don't recognize." Emily saw for the first time the vulnerability behind the imposing facade. "Nathan was never lost," she responded softly. "He just needed to be found in a different way." Margaret nodded, unshed tears shining in her eyes. "And what about Richard? He also seems found." Emily felt her face heat up. "Our relationship is evolving slowly, respecting Nathan's boundaries and our own." It was true. In recent months, she and Richard had built something delicate and precious, starting with dinners after work at the center, long conversations about dreams and fears, small gestures that revealed mutual care. The first kiss had happened only weeks ago, in a quiet moment in the center's garden, when words were no longer necessary to express what they felt. On the first anniversary of the Constellation Center, a small ceremony gathered staff, families served, and supporters. Nathan surprised everyone by asking to speak at the microphone, something unthinkable a year before. "Thank you for coming to our star house," he said, his voice clear despite the evident nervousness. "Here we can be ourselves." He looked at Emily and Richard, who were watching side by side, hands discreetly intertwined. "Thank you, Emily, for teaching me that different doesn't mean wrong. And thank you, Dad, for not giving up." After the ceremony, when the families had already left, Richard took Emily to the small observatory built on the property, Nathan's favorite space. Under the starry sky, he took a small box from his pocket. "I didn't plan an elaborate speech," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I just want you to know that you transformed our world. You brought light when we were lost in darkness." He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring. "We don't need to rush. We can continue at our own pace. But I want you to know that when you're ready, I want to build a life with you." Emily looked at the ring, then at the man in front of her. So different from the formal businessman she had met in the cafe more than a year ago. In his eyes, she saw not only love but deep respect, genuine admiration for the person she was. "I'm ready," she responded simply. The wedding took place 6 months later, an intimate ceremony in the center's garden. Nathan and Jason were the best men, side by side, equal in their differences. Margaret watched from the front row, her face serene for the first time in years. When Richard and Emily exchanged vows, they spoke not only of love, but of respect, of acceptance, of mutual growth. They spoke of different worlds that met not by chance, but by a deep need for understanding and connection. That night, under the same starry sky where they had committed to each other, Emily looked at her new family, so different from what she had ever imagined, so perfect in its imperfection. "You know what I like most about stars?" asked Nathan, looking through the telescope. "What?" asked Emily, smiling. "They seem distant from each other, but they actually form constellations, like us." Richard wrapped his arm around Emily's shoulders, while Jason adjusted the telescope for Nathan. "Like us," she repeated, finally feeling that she had found her place in the universe. Dear listeners, we hope that Emily and Richard's story has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here by clicking on the left. If you like this narrative, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complex